Welcome to Got Grass, conversations with the legends and leaders of bluegrass. You've enjoyed live bluegrass at Guitar Town CT concerts in Hamden, Connecticut since 2008. From Tony Rice, Rouse Stanley, and Doyle Lawson to Tim O'Brien, Sierra Hall, and Billy Strings. Now you can go behind the scenes as we chat with your favorite bluegrass stars. I'm your podcast host, Chris Worth. I'm very happy to welcome Blake Wiliams to Got Grass today. Welcome, Blake.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm honored that you would consider me for your show. Thank you.
Before we get into music at all, I was wondering, and I think I know the answer to this, what's a perfect day off for you, a day off from music for you these days?
You know, my wife, Kimberly, has had a successful public relations company for many years and has had some wonderful clients. And she's expanded into a few different roles here lately, management of Michael Cleveland. She's dipping her toes into the country music world. And so our lives are never boring between the farm, the music business, the discussions that go on at our house. It's a wonderful thing. A day off for us probably would be hiking in the mountains or a stream or something. We love to get out into nature, and but you know, we had a meeting with Russell Moore last night. The night before that, we were at the Pitney family, Mo Pitney's family's picking, and we've got a Michael Cleveland appearance at the Grand Ole Opry tomorrow night. So, I mean, it's just, it's all over the place.
Well, that sounds like fun. I've emailed back and forth with Kimberly quite a few times over the years. I've never met her, or actually even seen her in person, but I know she's busy and does a lot for the bluegrass world and enjoys it as you do. So where exactly did you grow up?
I was born and raised in Sparta, Tennessee, the hometown of Lester Flatt and Benny Martin. And the beautiful thing about it is that we were about 85 miles from the Ryman Auditorium. It was close enough to Nashville that we had easy access, and I listened to the Opry growing up, and we had a lot of bluegrass bands around here when I was growing up that I could go watch and learn and pick with, and we had a little local radio station show down here, and also I ended up being a DJ on that station for several years too. So music and radio in Sparta, Tennessee, that's where I came from.
You remember your old telephone number from your childhood house?
Oh my gosh, it was 738-2375, I believe. Yeah. How about that?
That's good. That's funny because to me, it's one of those things I will never forget is, well, originally it was Glendale 323. It was before the three-digit pre-thing was just GL and then the number. So I remember Glendale 32328 as a kid, and I'll never forget it.
Before... I remember in our little rural community here being in a part of a party line where there was 8 or 10 different people on your phone, and you could pick up the phone to use it, and there would be someone else having a conversation. Now that was a lot of fun. You had to wait your turn.
This is something that the new generation would have no idea about. I can't even conceive of that. Can't conceive of it. So as a kid, was your house kind of like the music house on the street or in the neighborhood where people would come to hang out and jam and listen to music, or?
Not necessarily. My father ran a general store in Sparta, Tennessee, and he was working 6 days a week. My mother helped him with that, and of course, we always had some beef cattle and a few things going on around the farm here. But what really was the gathering place for us, my dad started selling and buying used instruments. A little music shop became attached to the grocery store, and so that's where all the picking took place. It was in town in Sparta, and people would stop by, and me and Dad and whoever was in there would play, and a lot of times left Mom to run the store. So once in a while, she'd call us out of there to to load up a sack of feed or something, you know.
That sounds like a musical kid's dream to have a music store.
It really was, and it you know it wasn't a it wasn't a complete all encompassing store for band instruments and sheet music and things, but it was mostly acoustic instruments, amplifiers and such. And in fact, my daddy traded for a 1950s RB 250 Gibson banjo. And when I ran my fingers across that banjo, it sort of spoke to me. There was a tone and a quality there that I'd never experienced before. And when I was almost 13, I carried that thing out and went to work and never did stop.
That became your banjo.
It did. I played that banjo for several years. In fact, I still had it when I first started playing with Bill Monroe, but I ended up getting some endorsement things, and I don't have that banjo anymore. I wished I did.
Uh, I'm sure you had banjo hero or heroes growing up with so much of that music around you.
Yeah, I always said that Earl Scruggs ruined my life because uh, I can remember watching the Martha White television shows on Saturday afternoon out of WSM television in Nashville. And of course, Lester still lived here at that time. And so there would be glimpses of them leaving to go somewhere together, or they would be in a parade here in Sparta. And so I guess Earl Scruggs, I never was as good as the Earl Scruggs style as a lot of people are, but his tone and timing. Uh, Sonny Osborne was a favorite of mine because of his incredible backup and intuitive playing. Uh, and then, of course, we had the people like Doug Dillard and Bobby Thompson and Alan Shelton and all of those guys that were so innovative. We've had so many great banjo players down through the years, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Until I started doing a little research, more research about you, never knew that you worked for Lester Flatt before you worked for Bill Monroe. You worked for him for about a year or so. Is that?
Yes, I got a call one day in 1976. I was 20 years old, and it was Benny Martin. And he said, Blake, he said, Lester needs a banjo picker for 3 or 4 days this weekend. And he said, we were having a hard time finding somebody. Uh, I believe Kenny Ingram might have had the flu or something and couldn't go. And he said, I told Lester he needed to give old Blake a chance. And so here I was with Benny Martin, Lester Flatt, Charlie Nixon, Pete Coram, Marty Stewart, and Curly Seckler. And I told Lester, I said, Kenny Ingram is playing really fast. I don't know if I can do this or not. So we got backstage and warmed up on a tune, and Lester just reared his head back and laughed. And he said, yeah, I believe you can do it. But we sort of became friends, and I loved his dry sense of humor. And when Kenny Ingram left to go back to Jimmy Martin in 1978, Lester called me and asked me if I would become part of the Nashville Grass. And of course, that was the last summer of touring for Lester because of his failing health, and he died in May of 1979. But I recorded a live festival album called Tennessee Mountain Bluegrass Festival on CMH Records. And we did an album called Fantastic Picking, which was an all instrumental album. And I actually had a tune that I had written called Drive Time, and Lester let me record that on that Fantastic Picking album. So, yeah, that was one of my heroes, getting to play with Lester.
So when he asked you to play in a band, did he actually call you on the phone and do you do a Lester Flatt voice imitation like how he
Well,
would ask you?
he's a mighty fine old feller up there. We call him Hard Luck Slim. No, I'm not. My impersonation's not that good, but
Started out okay.
yeah, he what you saw with his relaxed MC style on the old TV shows and the records, that was Lester. He was just real laid back. He had a nickname for just about everybody. And I like to tell a story about uh, the old days at the Ryman. Now, this was before I went to work with him, but they didn't have any air conditioning down there years ago. And it was pretty packed backstage, real small dressing room. And it was a hot August evening, and Lester said, "Boys, we got to do something back here." He said, "We're going to die." So he marched into the manager's office and he said, "We're going to take up a collection and buy some air conditioning." And the guy said, "Well, Lester, it's going to cost $1 million to air condition the Ryman Auditorium at that time." And Lester said, "Well, it ain't near as hot as I thought it was." that's that's the kind of humor that Lester could come up with pretty quick.
With that, at that time in the band, I'm guessing Marty Stewart was still pretty young.
He was
You know,
19 years old when I
19.
joined.
So he was a little younger than you. So you were like the older
Yeah,
veteran. He was like the young kid kind of thing.
well, I was about 2 years older than him, but of course we were surrounded by people like Curly Seckler and those guys, and so it was it was uh, it was wonderful, really wonderful.
Was Lester Flatt at that point? I know he was getting on toward the end of his life. Was he kind of still excited about performing live, or was he kind of getting just tired of it, or I don't know. What was his vibe at that point in his
I,
life?
I think that Lester always looked at it more as a show. I feel a lot of musicians nowadays are so concentrated on the perfection and the instrumentation and everything that Lester Moore looked at it as an entertainment show because he had been on radio and he'd been on television his whole life. And I laughed because he would do a Roy Acuff song and try to do a Roy Acuff impersonation, but it sounded like Roy Acuff doing Lester Flatt. Really, it was sort of comical, but he could really connect with an audience. And I just felt like that Lester was doing what he always did, and that he enjoyed doing it, and he enjoyed being out with his band. And even though he was tired and he didn't feel good, I really feel like he just he loved doing it. You know.
It's funny you mentioned that about modern young bluegrass bands because I have that exact same feeling that a lot of them are so concerned with playing, with being virtuosos that they forget that you're really there to entertain and communicate with the audience, not show off. And to me, that's an issue with a lot of young musicians. And I've said it in many
Well,
podcasts.
I'm really blessed that I got to be around the Grand Ole Opry when the forefathers of bluegrass and country music were still there, and just without exception, they mostly came from poor backgrounds. They mostly was really hungry, and they were looking for their to make their own mark on the music they played. And, if Grandpa Jones had to strap a pair of bells on his feet and do a song, or if he wrote a gospel song that was just hauntingly beautiful, they all were trying to connect with an audience. And the music they created wasn't contrived, it's just what came out of them. And so their music was so good that those tunes are still played to this day. You go to a festival, you're going to hear Bill Monroe and Lester Flatt and Earl Scruggs tunes. But we got so many incredible young artists that I do feel like sometimes the connection part is missing. They didn't have to go into a room at 6 o'clock in the morning with one microphone and sell a sack of Martha White flour and end the show on time and promote their new record and tell where they were going to be that night. And they had to do that in such a way that you could get people to engage and come and see them. So it's all of the music business is all about making some sort of connection, I think.
I agree. So, one of Earl Scruggs, obviously Flatt and Scruggs split up a long time ago, but the Foggy Mountain Breakdown is a classic song played in almost every bluegrass jam. And sometimes the song goes from the G to the E minor, but does it sometimes go to the E major, or is there kind of like a little thing there? Sometimes goes on and off. I've wondered about that.
Today, most by and large people will go to E minor on the guitar, but Lester played a E major. It was an interesting dynamic when Earl was going to the minor on the banjo and Lester was playing the major, but uh, it it just worked. It was just unique, you know.
I guess it's one of those funny little quirks that the audience might not even pick up on. I don't know. I love it. It reminds me of Monroe's song "Can't You Hear Me Calling," where in the second line the harmony goes to like the major seventh note. All right, it's kind of like
Right.
a weird thing that again people might not really pick up who are not musicians, but I always think it was so unusual and cool these little things.
Yeah, Joe Stewart went out with us one time in Bill's band, and Tater was playing the fiddle, and we were doing "Can't You Hear Me Calling?" And Nashville's got the number system where the G chord would be a one, and the C would be a four, and the D would be a five. And Joe hollered out across the stage, and he said, "Tater," he said, "that four is not in there." So, and Joe was used to playing "Can't You Hear Me Calling" from the '50s onward without going to the C chord, and that's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Those little things.
Yeah, very, very cool. So you've played with a lot of bands for a lot of years. Do you ever get tired of being asked about Bill Monroe, or you still enjoy having these conversations?
I enjoy it because I was there for 10 years and I got to play with Kenny Baker and all those great players. And then, in the studio, get to work with Bobby Hicks and Buddy Spiker. And, and, and because of who Bill was, I got to do some things that were incredible, from European tours to playing Carnegie Hall to working still on a major label in Nashville, and being on an album that won a Grammy, the Southern Flavor album. So it's such a cool thing, and people want to know about Bill's persona because he was such a monster, such a creator of a great art form, and he uh, he played for so many years and worked so hard and just had a real presence about him, and so they want to know more about everything from his songwriting to the funny stories. And I don't ever get tired of talking about him. And for the rest of my life, I probably will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I've listened to a lot of your podcast interviews, and you have a great voice and eloquence and memories in all this stuff. So that makes it interesting for people because it just sounds like it's real stuff coming from your heart, which is I think is the key to all of it.
Well, that's
But
kind.
yeah, so when Bill Monroe asked you to join his band, was that also via telephone call, or was that an in-person conversation, or did it kind of just evolve?
I was actually in between jobs. Lester Flatt had passed away. I was no longer working with the Nashville Grass. And so I was working at the radio station here in Sparta and playing a few shows with James Monroe, Bill's son. And I was going to work a show in North Carolina, and I met James Monroe in Cookeville, Tennessee. He picked me up, and he said, "Did you know that Butch Robbins has left Daddy's band?" And I said, "No." And he had left either 3 or 4 weeks before that. I had no idea. And James was wanting to try to do a country record, and he told me, he said, "You should try out for that job." He said, "Daddy's got a guy filling in right now, but," he said, "he's tried out a bunch of banjo players." He said, "You should go for that job." So we got to the festival, and Bill was working the festival, and I went over and knocked on the door. And of course, he knew me, And I went up and I said, Bill, I said, I'm interested in that banjo job. I said, how would you feel about me coming down and playing a few songs on the stage with you tonight? And he said, that'd be fine. So he called me out, and I believe I played Shucking the Corn, and we did a gospel tune. I think it was Crying Holy, and I sang baritone with him. And he was very non-committal about any any questions or anything. And I told James, I said, he's not going to hire me because he don't want you to quit playing bluegrass. And I said, I'm working with you, so he's not going to offer me that job. And James said, well, I'm going to take care of that. So he got off the bus, he went over to Bill's, he came back, we were ready to leave, and James said, that job is yours if you want it. Following Tuesday, Bill called me and he said, I've got some shows that I need some help with. And he told me where they were. There was 3 or 4 dates in a row that weekend. And I said, well, I can do that. I said, does this mean I've got the job? And he said, I guess so. That was my hiring. I
Uh,
guess so. And it
uh,
lasted 10 years. Yeah.
so at that point, was the pay schedule ever discussed? Like, did you know what was there a weekly pay, or how did that all work in those days?
In 1981, union scale for a traveling musician was $50 a day. And shortly after I joined the band, he increased that to 80. And it wasn't long after that to it went to $100 a day. He furnished our suits. We furnished our own hats. We bought our own food. He furnished the transportation. So that's how that worked. And we were also members of the Nashville Musicians Union, so that the Grand Ole Opry checks all came through that. And if we weren't on the road, we were at the Grand Ole Opry. There was no time off ever. Bill worked the Opry or the road year round.
Did you guys get paid in cash in those days? Was it or
It's interesting. The first 6 months or a year that I was with Bill, he paid in cash but withheld taxes, and I got a W-2 at the end of the year. And finally, somebody come in and said, "You need to start writing checks. You have no records of things." So we we went to a check system pretty quickly.
gotcha? Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard you say, and I agree that Monroe's band was pretty much a fiddle-driven band. I've had a couple of his fiddlers on the podcast, including more recently Gene Lowinger, who played with him in 64, I think, 64, 65. Gene had a very funny story. I don't know if you've heard it, but um, Bill came up to him and said, that fiddle you're playing is a piece of junk. Here, try these two. And Gene tried one. He tried the other. He said, I like this one. And Bill said, well, you play this one from now on. And he played it every show from then on. But he never told Gene that that was his actual Uncle Pen's fiddle that he was having him play for that whole year until Gene, years later, saw the fiddle in the Bluegrass Museum. And he said, oh my God, that's the fiddle that I played with Bill Monroe. He never knew it was
Wow.
Uncle Pen's fiddle. I thought that was just the most
That
interesting
that
story.
that is a great story. I'd never heard that.
Yeah, yeah.
There was a story one time about a guy that was showing Bill his mandolin, and he was asking Bill for some playing advice. And he said, I just wonder if you could offer me any advice. He said, I'm just not, I'm struggling on the mandolin. And Bill said, let me see your mandolin. And Bill got it, played a little bit on it, chopped on it a few chunks, and he handed it back to him. And he said, well, it's not the mandolin. So he could be very direct.
That's good. That's good. So when you were with Bill Monroe, it seemed like there was a lot of churn, as they would call it, members coming and going. You stayed for a long time. Do you remember a lot of changes in personnel over those the 10 years or so that you were there?
The first 3 or 4 years, we had Mark Hembry on bass, Kenny Baker, and Wayne Lewis. And that was pretty steady for the first 3 or 4 years. When Kenny left, there was a lot of fiddle players that came through, and I think mainly because Bill loved Kenny's playing so much. It was a smooth, long bow style of fiddle playing. It was a unique style, and it was uniquely Bill Monroe's sound at that point. And some of the fiddle players that came up in the school of old time fiddle playing, or maybe Paul Warren style, just did not work for Bill as much. And a fiddle player had to be someone that kicked off nearly every song. It had to be true. And Bill, when you were playing a break with Bill Monroe, when you got through with that break, he would immediately start singing. You didn't play a few extra measures like they do nowadays before someone comes in. He'd say, "That's where I come in." And so we would take a break, and you would notice it immediately. He would sing. So he didn't like a lot of busy sound behind his music. He liked a clean sound. And so the fiddle players, he was pretty hard on them. He expected him to play a certain way and to know a certain thing about old time playing. And I don't think he wanted the music to change too much by the time I got there. Bobby Hicks told me in the 50s that when Bill was writing a fiddle tune and you were working with him, he had no problem letting you experiment with that tune a little bit. But by the time I got there, things were sort of set, and he wanted bluegrass to be sort of unique and set apart from swing or jazz, if that makes sense. So
It does.
he was tough on fiddle players, and so we went through a Texas fiddle player, Dale Morris, Glenn Duncan, Billy Joe Foster, Mike Fagan, Mark Squires, uh, Wayne Gerald's. There was just a whole host of fiddle players. He he really liked Glenn Duncan's playing, and he really liked Billy Joe Foster's playing. They seemed to fit. They know what he need. They could understand what he wanted.
Yeah.
So when you say the Paul Warren style versus Kenny Baker, I assume you mean Paul Warren was a lot more bowing going on back and forth. Like
There
that's
there was yeah, him. Tater Tate was sort of from that school. Tater was really good on double stops, really great musician. But Tater and Mac McGahey and Paul Warren and those guys came up more of uh, a lot of bowling and a lot of movement on stage, a lot of showmanship. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, yeah,
and Kenny Baker was kind of the opposite of that. He just stood there, right? And I mean,
Kenny
that's my
just
sense.
his tone was just so sweet and pure. And I mean, when he played double stops in B flat on a fiddle, I mean, it sounded like there was three fiddles there. It was just amazing. I really loved Kenny's playing a lot.
Yeah. I'm trying to get everybody on the podcast who played with Tony Rice and Bill Monroe just as starters. And I had Mark Hembry on the podcast, and he was talking about, he was a long-haired kid from Wisconsin, a hippie kind of guy, and he had stories about Bill talking about his hair and he didn't have a hat and he can't dress like that. And but Mark was saying that he had a really hard time fitting into the Southern kind of culture, especially the language. He said, I just couldn't understand a word they were saying to me. Now, maybe they were trying to over exaggerate the accent just to kind of bust his chops because he was a new kid. But I
Yeah.
thought that was funny. He said, I'd go into a diner with Bill and they'd ask me a question. I just would not know what they were asking me.
Yeah, I remember him struggling when I got there, and I tried to act as a little bit of a buffer for him. Uh, he would try to engage Bill Monroe in conversation, but it was uh, it was strained at best. One day, I witnessed Mark talking to Bill about bass playing, and he said, "Bill, in the early days of your music, we had a lot of bass players that was doing a walking bass or a what Mark called a 4/4 timing bass, and he said there was a lot of movement in the bass fiddles in the early music. And he might have even referenced Bluegrasss Stomp or some of those early instrumentals that had that 4/4 walking bass. And he said, "Would you like uh, for me to play more of that now, because that's not been in your music for a long time?" And Bill's answer was, "I've had some sorry bass players." that was the end of the conversation.
That's a pretty good answer. Sums it up, I guess.
Yeah, I've had some
I was
sorry
going to
bass
ask you
players.
about that because I know walking bass, maybe as a continuation of like the swing music and stuff that was going on in the 30s, could be very prominent in early, whatever you want to call, before even bluegrass. But Monroe music, the walking bass was common, and then it kind of disappeared. Do you know, was that because Bill just didn't like it? Did he like drop it out of bluegrass? Because you don't ever hear it anymore.
I don't know the exact answer to that. I feel like when the bluegrass music was in its early years, that was probably another one of those instances where Bill had taken part of another music, incorporated it, just as he did blues. Uh, it might have just been from a little bit of Western swing or big band music, which was common at the time. But I don't know any conversation I've ever had with anybody about why it stopped. And it might just have been because bass players didn't all play that way, and I don't know. That's a good question, though. That is a good question.
I know Bill Monroe, the legend is, and some of your stories are proving it, that he could be very blunt and to the point. He could say in one sentence what might take somebody a whole paragraph to explain. Were there certain
Yeah.
topics that Bill would like to talk about at length with either band members or people who would really open up?
He did not explain his talk about his music much. There would be a night when we'd had a really good show or a really responsive crowd that he would say, "Boy, this has been really a powerful night," or something. But I never really saw him explaining how his music should be played. It was almost understood that you needed to know how his music was to be played before you got there. Now, he would let you know if he didn't like something, but the things that I saw him talk the most about was growing up in Rosine, Kentucky. When he was a teenager, he had a job hauling telephone poles on a wagon with a team of mules. And he loved to tell about that, how he could load those things and get them into town. And he always loved having mules and farm animals and wagons around. He he talked some about working at the Sinclair refinery when he moved to Chicago with his brothers, and how he was cleaning out these oil drums and how he could take a 50-gallon barrel and spin it and make that barrel walk across the floor into another room. And those days seemed like they had a lot of appeal to him with Uncle Pen, the music, working on a farm. His younger days, he would open up about those things a lot. Yeah.
Wow.
Did he ever talk about his brother Charlie while you were around him, or was that just a verboten subject?
Uh, I feel like that Bill Monroe had a there was a thing about him where you were either for him or against him, and there wasn't a lot of middle ground. And I feel like the history between him and Charlie and how they took the music and stuff. I did have the opportunity to see them on occasion together talking at a distance, they seemed to be civil one another. But I never heard him really comment about him very much.
Yeah, I heard this funny story. I don't know if it's true from Peter Rowan, who was also on the podcast, and he said they were driving on the bus, and Bill told the bus driver, "Pull over here." So he pulled over. Bill got out, walked up the driveway, knocked on the door. Somebody opened it. Bill punched him, came back, got on the bus, and said, "Let's go." And Peter said, "Who's that?" He goes, "That was Charlie."
Oh,
No,
wow.
I don't know if that's. I mean, the story is who knows, but it made a good story. It's believable. I don't know. It just sounded.
I think it was pretty well documented that they used to have some pretty well known brawls from time to time. And Peter, the last time I saw Peter, we talked about the fact that Bill Monroe used to say that he had another music in his head. He said, "I've got a whole nother music in my head, but I can't play it because my fans wouldn't understand." And I talked to Peter Rowan about that, and he said he was saying the same thing in the '60s. And Peter would try to get maybe a little clue or out of him. He said, would it have would it have a Hawaiian guitar in it, maybe?" And Bill said, "Well, it could have, and he was just real vague. And I think it's interesting that for 30 or 40 years, he told people that he had another music in his head, but his fans wouldn't understand.
It is funny. It adds to the legend. Do you have any idea if that was the case or what the music might have been? That I mean, he covered so many things in his music, as you say, from blues, gospel, fiddle tunes, you know, ballads. A lot of these ballads, which came from like old German poetry and stuff, that um, you would have thought he would have been able to express it somehow, even with his bandmates. Like, this is what I have. What do you think? I don't know. It's just
No, no,
interesting.
no. He whatever was going on there, he obviously guarded the secret very well. He didn't give us any ideas.
You think it was some kind of a spiritual feeling, just more like a feeling he had about this music and not necessarily notes and chords, or it's intriguing, like what it might have been.
Well, the one thing that you can say about Bill Monroe is the fact that he was very creative. Um, he always got his mandolin out of the case backstage before a show, and wherever his fingers landed on the neck, he would just start doodling around there. And just about every night, he would actually create a tune. Uh, and this was the days before cell phones, and we didn't have immediate ability to record these tunes. If if the band was backstage at the time, or me or the fiddle player was back and actually learned the tune, we might go out on stage and play that tune that night. He might even ask the audience for a name for the tune. But so many of those were lost because some of them were not so good, some of them were pretty decent, and some of them were great. But
Yeah.
it was a constant outlet of creativity. And so I can only imagine something he might have thought up. I mean, who would have thought Bill Monroe would have recorded My Last Days on Earth in that eerie tuning, And not only did he keep trying to create music, and by and large, he was writing fiddle tunes. It goes back to that love for fiddle as a child, I guess. But he was always pushing the boundaries on an instrumental, or he was trying to come up with a different way for somebody to. He had a tune called "The Long Bow" just because it was written to emphasize the long bow of the fiddle, and he was a big song plugger too. I mean, I witnessed him telling Ray Charles, we I've got a song we need to record together, and he just he understood the power of publishing, and he understood the power of creativity. And man, what a catalog he wound up with.
Yeah. So he would play on the mandolin after the show or on the bus and come up with a tune. Would he try to teach you guys on the spot, or how would the band pick up a song from him to play in a concert that night? You just heard it on the mandolin and tried to remember it, or
He didn't play on the bus very much. He usually did this when he was backstage warming up before a show,
uh,
and so sometimes we were there. Uh, he didn't just come into the Grand Ole Opry and say, "I've written this tune this week, let's try it." It just seemed like it was an ongoing process of him trying to come up with tunes. And that happened to the banjo tune on Southern Flavor, there was a tune I recorded with him called Sugarloaf Mountain. We were up in Vermont. Bill had started playing this little tune, and to me, on the banjo, it reminded me a little bit of an odd kind of version of Clinch Mountain Backstep. So I thought, I'm going to see if I can get this going. So I learned enough of it that night that I could play it. When we were in the studio with Southern Flavor, we had the album done, and Emery Gordy said, "How about a banjo tune?" And so I just started trying to remember that little thing there, and Emery said, "Man, that is really different." And Bill said, "Well, who wrote that?" I said, "You did." He said, "Is that right?" So he started trying to remember it then. And so it wound up on the album with 3 fiddles, and it was pretty cool, Sugarloaf Mountain.
Yeah. Peter Rowan was talking about the bus that I guess was kind of nicknamed, at least by him, the Bluegrasss Breakdown, because it was not all that reliable. Yeah. I assume you had a different bus by the time you were in the band, a better bus.
Well, it was an old Lincoln Continental Silver Eagle that had been converted into a tour bus. And if you really want to know what that bus was like, buy Mark Hembry's book. The description of the bus and the carpet and the fumes and the whole thing will give you the complete story on the Bluegrasss Special. So,
well, I have the book. I highly recommend the book. By the way, it's a fabulous book. I'm waiting for your book. Waiting for your book, but Mark's is really good.
I get a lot of requests for that. Mine probably fall under more of the stories and the little funny anecdotes and things, and I don't know really. If you don't know Bill Monroe and his persona, how funny they would be to the general public. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I know, especially from talking to Mark Hembry, that the dress code was, you had to dress up to play in his band, and you had to wear a hat, correct? That was part of the...
Oh, the hat, I believe it was the most important article, because we were looking for a guitar player to fill in for Wayne Lewis one time, and it was one of those last-minute things. And we were in Bill's little office out on Dickerson Road in Nashville, and Glenn Duncan and myself had a phone book out, and Bill had his Rolodex out, and Bill had 2 phones. He had one on each ear, and we were calling guitar players at midnight, And he said, hello, can you go out? Do you have a hat? So the hat was very, very important. He wanted you to have on dress shoes, and of course the suit and the tie, and look presentable. And he wanted you to be on time. He wanted you to be ready to go. He wanted you to have a full appreciation for the melody of the tune you were playing. And yeah, those were must.
Do you still have a hat from those days? Have you saved it?
I do. I've got my felt hat and my straw. We would change over to a felt hat around November because it was cold weather. So had to have 2 hats actually. But yeah, I've still got mine.
Was he still dancing occasionally on stage at concerts at that point? Even at his age, and he was not young at that when you were in his band. I mean, he was what, in his late 60s maybe or something? Or
when I joined the band in 81, he was 70. And we were on a full summer schedule, 18, 19, 20 days a month on the road, playing the Opry. And he was just a physically strong man, and he loved to work, and he loved to travel, and he loved to play. It's amazing what energy he had at his age. It really is. It's remarkable.
And, people talk about all these rock musicians that are still playing after so many years, but I mean, Monroe played basically his whole life, and right? I mean, that's a long performing career for anybody. And for him,
Yeah,
because he wasn't sitting down, he was still standing up and playing at the end, right? I know Lester Flatt would sit, but Bill Monroe would stand and
he
play his
would.
breaks and stuff.
He We went to play a country music festival in Japan. It was called Country Gold, and it ran for several years. They usually took a major country artist or two, and then a bluegrass band over there. And uh, I went with Bill, and I don't know which year it was, but uh, our room was real close to the venue, and I got a call from an interpreter that said Bill Monroe is running a fever. And evidently, Bill had already gone to the venue, and Marty Stewart was there with him. I think uh, I can't remember who else was on the show. Roger Miller. Roger Miller was on that show. But the interpreter said that Bill was running a little bit of a temperature and a little bit dehydrated, and he was confused. And you got to bear in mind that we're 2 hours from our one performance in Japan for that whole trip. And so the doctors recommended that Bill get just an IV, get some fluids in him to get dehydrated. And it was a combination of maybe getting his eating schedule a little bit messed up, and some of his medications were off a little bit, probably not hydrated enough. So they brought him back to the hotel where we were at. I met him in the lobby, and I said, Bill, these doctors want to give you just a saline IV to give you some energy and get you hydrated, because I said it would really help you. It would get this temperature down, and it would get your energy level back. And he said, well, I'll do it when I get back to Nashville on Tuesday. And I said, we're not going to be back in Nashville on Tuesday. I mean, he was that confused, but he went with them to the room. And 30 minutes later, he came back down to go do the show. And I asked them, did he allow them to give him an IV? And they said, no, he did not. Somehow, this man managed to walk out on that stage and just plant his feet squarely on the stage and do a 1 hour show that was as good as I'd ever heard in my life. So I've seen him he could just buck himself up and rise to the occasion no matter how bad he felt. And I saw that happen on several occasions. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, yeah. I guess he was a powerful, tough man in lots of ways. I guess that.
He used to say it's going to take something really powerful to get me down. That's what he would say.
Yeah. Did he ever suggest to you or tell you how to play banjo on certain songs, or was it kind of left up to your discretion to how to fit into the music?
Well, it goes back to the melody. There was some times early. I'll tell you what was the biggest struggle for me. The Master of Bluegrass album had just been released about a month before I went to work with him. It was that all instrumental album. It was a completely different style of mandolin that I was accustomed to hearing him play. He had a lot of tunes in minor chords, My Last Days on Earth and Right Right On and Ebenezer Scrooge and all these remarkable tunes. But I really had to dig in and try to learn the melodies of these things, because on some of these songs on the record, there was no banjo break, but on stage, he was expecting one. And so Mark Hembry helped me navigate some of that melody part of those tunes. But the only time I think early on, I was playing a tune backstage at the Opry when we were warming up in the dressing room, and he said, play that again. And I realized that I hadn't played the melody on that first go through. So I did the second time I played it. And he said, no, that's how it's supposed to go. Why don't you do that right there? So it all came back to the melody, but he never did tell me what notes to play or anything like that. I think, as you said, it was just sort of expected at that point. And I will be honest and say that there were better banjo players to play fiddle tunes. Bob Black and Butch Robbins and Vic Jordan, some of those guys were, and Bill Keith, those guys were geniuses at playing melodic fiddle tunes note for note. I never was. I was more, I guess I leaned more toward Lester Flatt's music and the Scruggs style playing. And Earl could play fiddle tunes, we all know. But Bill's banjo players became a little more advanced at doing those fiddle tunes, the melody parts and the melodic uh, fiddle tune playing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had Richard Green talking about the evolution of Bill Monroe's band. He was playing fiddle at the time with Peter Rowan back in the 60s, a whole different generation, different era, a lot of pot smoking going on and stuff. But I guess Bill loved Richard Green's playing and really encouraged him to play his own style on solos. And that's what Richard was saying. He never said a word to me. He just liked my playing, and I was able to go wherever I wanted to, really. And I guess, as you're saying, the music got older and more established, and people expected a certain sound from a Bill Monroe band, that he would give them that sound. But I guess early on, maybe it was a little less controlled.
I have a perfect example of that. Billy Joe Foster left the band to go back to Oklahoma, and I think it was on the. I think he felt like he was going to take a short hiatus and get some health issues under control and come back. But long story short, it was a while before he came back, and so Bill hired Buddy Spiker to play fiddle with us. Buddy, as we all know, is one of the finest fiddle players of a generation. He played on all those great music, those records in Nashville. He was on a lot of Bill Monroe records playing harmony parts, so he knew the music. But he told me one night, he said, I'm fixing to take bluegrass fiddle playing to another level. And this would have been in the mid 80s. And I said, not in this band, you're not. And he said, why? And I said, well, I feel like the experimentation phase is done past, and I think Bill expects a certain thing, a certain way. And I said, he loves the melody so much. And I said, if you get too far off that path, it's not going to work. And he said, well, I'm going to try it. About 2 months after that, Bill motioned me to come back into his room in the back of the bus one day after a show and said, Buddy Spiker's really tearing our music down. And I said, well, Bill, he's just trying to do some things that's different a little bit. And he said, yeah, that's not working. And that was the end of Buddy playing with the Bluegrasss Boys. I don't know what Bill said to him or how he handled it, but there's an instance where one of the most creative minds. I saw Buddy Spiker one time practicing, and he was playing a waltz on his fiddle, and he played the waltz in every key, double stops and all. So I knew he was brilliant. But I think Bill had started sort of tapping the brakes on his style of music at that point. And I think that's a good example.
That's interesting.
So you're famous for lots of things, but one is your banjo rhythm chop, which became a big part of the Monroe band sound, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
And was that just your reaction to this is going to sound better than trying to play rolls all the way through the music, or how did that, in your mind, how did you come to that idea that the chop was going to be a big part of your playing, as well as the solos and stuff? Or why are you laughing so much about this? I'm
laughing because just recently Chris Henry brought that to mind for me, and he felt like because I did that in Bill's band that was what should be done in everybody's band. So it's sort of funny. Me and Michael Cleveland have laughed about that a lot. I said, I guess that's how I left my mark on bluegrass music, was the chop. But Chris wanted to know if Bill instructed me to do that, and the answer is no. It just felt natural for me to roll behind the fiddle. to roll and play backup during the singing. And at that point in time, Bill Monroe still had a powerful mandolin job. It was incredible. But later on, he started doing a little more backup work. When, say, if Tom Ewing was singing, Bill would do some things, or play a melody behind him or some sort of a harmony line. And he was doing a lot of that at the time. So I think I was just naturally giving Bill more freedom. When Bill was playing the mandolin or if he was backing up, I just naturally felt like the chop worked. And I think I was a little sensitive to that too, because I worked with Bobby Smith, the boys from Shiloh, before I ever worked with Lester. And Uncle Josh Graves spent 2 years in that band. And I found out real quick that a banjo and a dobro playing at the same time don't work. So I think I was already a little bit sensitive about trying to make the music cleaner and what worked and didn't. And then you've got fiddle players like Michael Cleveland that's got such a fantastic fiddle chop on his own, but we didn't have that in Bill's band. So I think it was more to support Bill's playing and just make a cleaner sound. But it's funny because that chop thing just Chris and I just had this conversation maybe a couple of months ago, so that's why I was laughing.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
Fair enough. The first time I ever saw Michael Cleveland play, the chop was astounding. It was almost like he waves that bow around and slams it on the fiddle, and you have to stay away from him because he's making a big arc with it. But it was such a powerful thing. Well, his fiddle playing is anyway so powerful, but that chop is, that really, just like Bill Monroe's chop or yours would drive the band, so would Michael Cleveland's chop drive the band.
Kimberly has worked with Michael for a long time, and we have witnessed the world waking up to what a great player he is in the last few years. And I think in part is because of his collaborations. One of them, namely, going out with Bela, and Bela recognizing that he's so much more than a bluegrass fiddle player. And Mike Bubb told us a while back that Michael and Tommy Emmanuel did a show together up in Vermont last summer. And Tommy's got this really beautiful song that he plays toward the end of the set. And Michael was just doing exactly what needed to feel around Tommy's guitar playing. And Mike Bubb said there was grown men weeping in the audience. I just thought, what a testament to two great players. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Isn't that great?
Well, you want music to communicate and bring out emotion in the listeners, whatever it might be. So when it happens like that what else could you ask for? You're singing emotion on the instrument and connecting.
Isn't that great?
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. So you brought up Kimberly Williams, your wife. So I was just, I know she has a musical career and a big career as an agent and manager. And how did you and Kimberly meet? Do you remember?
I was playing bass, get fiddle with Mike Snyder at Opryland Theme Park. That was my gig after I left Bill Monroe, because we had all banjo players in the band. We had Charlie Cushman playing guitar. We had Mike Snyder, incredible banjo harmonica player, and then Bobby Clark playing mandolin, which Bobby also was a banjo player. And I went out to work with Mike when Bill Monroe had a health episode in 1991. And Mike said, "Can you play bass?" And I said, "Not really." He said, "Can you hold one?" And I said, "Yeah, I can hold one." He said, "Well, Charlie's got a bass. Let's put it in the van. You go out with us and we'll have some fun." Well, Mike Snyder and I just became really good friends, and I made a terrible mess on the bass, but I did learn a little music the next week and did a little better. And he ended up offering me a job. He said, "I got 110 days next year at Opryland. We've got Grand Ole Opry spots." And he said, "I'm working a lot of Farm Bureau and rural utility conventions." He said, if you want the job, he said, I'll hire you. And I said, well, I will do it, but I'm going to work my notice with Bill Monroe. When he gets able to work again, I want to be able to work a 2 week notice and find him a banjo player. And so I did that. There we were in Opryland. Kimberly walks in, and she's actually a technician at Opryland. She's working one of the big uh, theaters out there in the theme park. And we met and talked and just found out we were instantly in love and soulmates. And one thing led to another. And she ended up moving into the office and being a producer at Opryland, which was a job she loved. And then when me and Bobby Clark left Mike Snyder, Bobby said, let's start a bluegrass band. And I said, well, we'll starve to death. And he said, well, let's just pretend we're 16 and don't know any better. Well, I said, who are we going to get? And he said, well, Kimberly's going to have to be in the band because she's the only one of us that's got any business about her. So she sang, played bass. I played banjo. Bobby played mandolin. And Wayne Southers played guitar. And she started doing everything for our band, booking and all that. And that led to a job that Bluegrass was sorely in need of, and that was a public relations job. And then early on, she worked with Nothing Fancy and Marty Rabin and Russell Moore and Joe Mullins and Michael. And as time moved on, she really, really loved the business. And at that point, I'd been on the road so long that I was ready, to slow up too. So we're still in the business. We just don't play music as much. And so it works great. It really works great.
Yeah. Do you guys ever play together, even just around the house? Like you and Kimberly, do you pick up instruments and sing and play stuff together? Or?
I've got my banjo sitting here. I took it with me Sunday and did a little jamming with some friends. I don't play a lot anymore. Kimberly sold her bass. I mean, she went all in on the business aspect of things and got a beautiful voice. I love to hear her sing. It's a smooth voice, and her and her family came up here from Texas, and we just found something that works. I tell people that we prayed that we would be able to do things that would keep us together 24/7. So be careful what you pray for, because God answered our prayers.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about the banjo. I was wondering if you have a favorite banjo joke, since there are a lot of them out there, and most of them are pretty stale. You have a good one? Would you
Oh,
rather? We don't have to go there. I just thought
you know,
one
you,
might pop to mind.
you know the difference between a large domino pizza and a banjo player? A large domino pizza can feed a family of four.
That's a good one. Everybody
Yeah,
has one.
well,
I heard a funny one recently, which was there was this banjo player who was so depressed about his bad timing, he was suicidal, but his timing was so bad he jumped in back of a train. I thought that was cute.
that's good. I never heard that one. I love it.
I had neither.
Yeah, we don't get a lot of respect, but
No, it's true. It is. It is. So, just thinking ahead, at some point in your life, when you decide that you can't or don't want to play banjo anymore, is there somebody that you would like to have your banjo, your special banjo, if you have one? I assume you have one that's kind of a favorite.
I never did have an old pre-war banjo, and I regret not getting one when they were somewhat affordable early in my career. But I've got two banjos right now that I really love a lot. The first one is a Gibson Granada that Greg Rich brought to the Grand Ole Opry in 1987. He brought two of them, and he said, I want you to pick one of these, and I want Alan Shelton, who was back with Jim and Jesse, to take this one and see if you can sell us some banjos. It was the first reissue of the Gibson Granada. It's actually got a prototype decal in it. And that banjo sounded really good from the first day. And the Southern Flavor album was recorded with that banjo just months after I got it. And I really like that banjo a lot. It's unique, and the fact that it was the first one of the new Gibson reissues was really cool. And then in 2012, Sonny Osborne called me one day and he said, "Would you like to have one of my Chief banjos?" And I said, "Are you kidding?" I said, "I'd love to." And he said, "Well, there's some people that were kind to me that I really want to have one of my banjos." And he said, "It's you and Kristen Scott Benson and Bill Emerson." And I said, "Well, I would love to have one, Sonny." I said, "Where do you want to meet?" And he said, "How about Shoney's in Lebanon, Tennessee?" And I said, "What time?" He told me the date, the time. And when I pulled in, he was standing there with the case in the parking lot. He handed it to me and he said, "If you need anything done or whatever, here it is." We went in, spent 3 or 4 hours just telling stories and laughing and cutting up. But I ended up playing that Chief banjo on the Becky Buller cut of Southern Flavor, and I used it with our band for a while. But I just love both of those banjos. They feel really good. As far as who I would like to have a banjo, I don't know. I don't know that I would ever get rid of these banjos. I've never thought about that. I really hadn't.
Well, let's put it this way. Let's say in your will, at some point, at some point, we're all going to die. So in your
Yeah,
will, what would you rather have somebody play it or have it go to like a bluegrass museum or you have any, you never thought about that?
I have. I think a good instrument needs to be played. I really
Mhm.
do. Uh, they in order for a good instrument to keep its quality and its tone and its sound, it was made to be played. I agree with you there. But I don't know. I might have a grandson or two that might take an interest one of these days, but who knows?
That, yeah, I guess that would be your dream, right? To have somebody in the family
Well, sure.
take it on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would probably encourage him to go to college first, but I wouldn't discourage him from playing either.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so young banjo players coming up in the music, are there one or two tips that you would consider to be crucial to being a good bluegrass banjo player?
Oh wow. I would say that there's one constant is work on the basics early. I wished I'd have had this information when I started because I was more of a hunt and peck kind of guy. There wasn't a lot of things to do except maybe try to slow down a 33 record and try to figure out how they did it or watch somebody do it. But I think the guys that start out with really looking at how Bill Emerson and Earl Scruggs and J.D. Crowe planted their fingers and hit that pick with just the right angle to get the full tone and to concentrate on both tone and basic solid rolls is something that's never going to change. We've obviously got great players like Noam Pikelny and Bela Fleck and all of these guys that does such incredible things on the banjo that it's almost incomprehensible. But that stuff can come along later after you've got the tone and the timing, which is essential. So I would go back to the old school and if you can play anywhere close to the tone that Earl Scruggs did on Foggy Mountain Breakdown, then you can go on from there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I hear you. Yeah, I hear you. So these days, a lot of music is kind of labeled under the bluegrass umbrella. Um, it's become very popular with a lot of these young players like Billy Strings, Sierra Hull, Molly Tuttle. It's got huge audiences worldwide. And um, are there any limits to what you would consider bluegrass? It's a wide umbrella. I mean, Bill Monroe was kind of a revolutionary guy. He was always, pushing the envelope in lots of ways. Do you think there are limits as to what can be called bluegrass, or does it not really matter what it's called?
I don't think so. I think the driving force behind its survival is creativity and connection. And so uh, there was a promoter up in Michigan one time was spending a lot of money on promoting a festival, and I questioned him about some of his things he was doing, and he said, "Well, here's the bottom line. If you do what you've always done, you're going to get what you've always got." Same is true with music. Everybody can't play Bill Monroe and Lester Flatt music. They've got to find their own way, and Bill Monroe would be the first to tell you that. You know, if you're playing Bill's music, he wanted his music played a certain way, but a young man, he would say, you've got to do what you do. You know what I mean? And so I don't think there's limits. I applaud Billy Strings for taking that music to the arenas. I applaud his methods of promoting the music and getting the word out and the explosive growth. And I love it. I love where it's headed. And I just don't think we should hold it back at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's a good attitude towards music. So, is there anybody in the history of music, bluegrass or otherwise, that you would have loved to play with that you didn't get a chance to play with?
Oh, wow. Well, I was really blessed because there were so many instances recording with Bill uh, and being around the Grand Ole Opry for 20 years. They would have these specials and celebrations and birthday things and stuff, and I got to play with Earl and Lester and Dell. And I mean, I've been on stage with everybody from Roy Acuff to Charlie Pride. I don't know. I don't know. I don't. I've just had such a blessed life as far as that's concerned. I mean, we've been on shows with Ella Fitzgerald, got to meet Ray Charles. uh, Man, I don't know. I'm just amazed at the quality of some of the musicians now. I feel like that when I started out, uh, there weren't that many people you could go to teach, or there wasn't that many video lessons out. Tablature was out, but it was a chore at best. But a young guy going out now and he picks up the banjo and he can get a video with Bela Fleck on it. The bar starts out so much higher than it did when I was playing. There's music that these guys can do that's so far above me that I wouldn't even know how to play with them. In fact, I was playing out at Grass Valley, California with Bill Monroe, and they had us staying there on the property in little cabins in the woods in that park. And there was a knock on my cabin door, and I went. Tony Trishka was standing there, and he said, "Hey, Blake," he said, "we're going to have a banjo workshop over here in a few minutes." And he said, "It's me and Bela and Mark O'Connor and Pete Wernick," and he named off a half a dozen people. And he said, "Just wonder if you might want to come." I said, "What would I tell you guys to do? I mean, what can I add to this?" But yeah, yeah, I've been blessed in the people I've been around and become friends with and heard stories from. And so I don't know. That's a really great question, though.
Did you do that workshop that he asked you to do out
I
there?
did not. I did
You did
not. I
not.
went to it, but I was watching more than participating.
That's funny. That's a funny. Well, I
Yeah.
think I'm gonna wrap it up here. I mean, we've been talking for an hour and 15 minutes, and I love all your stories and your memories and your observations on bluegrass and all of it. It's been really nice chatting with you. Um, would you like to add anything else before we close off? You've said a lot, and I that last story was kind of a nice way to conclude things, but it's up to you if you want
Well,
to say anything else.
I've always said that the music can be a very humbling experience, and I really do feel blessed to have gotten to do the things that I've got to do. I told somebody one time I've gone further on less talent than anybody you'll know, but I think part of it is just being ready for the job and being dependable and likable and easy to travel with. Because let's face it, you play an hour a day, but you got to spend the other 23 hours with people. So you have to learn to navigate those little things and stuff. And I really did have a wonderful career in bluegrass. And we started off the interview. No, I never get tired of talking about Bill Monroe because he's an icon, and there'll never be another. He had such a strong willpower, and I guess if he didn't have that, he would have probably not made it through the 50s, because when Elvis hit, although Bill got the royalties off Blue Moon of Kentucky, country music and bluegrass music just completely dissolved almost. Tater Tate said he went to work with Bill in the 50s in 1956, and he said, we were lucky sometimes to make enough money on shows just to eat. So Bill had this willpower, and it was so strong, and once in a while he would say a little something to remind you of that. He told me one day, he said, me and Colonel Sanders has done more for the state of Kentucky than any two men. And when I tell people that story, they say, well, he's probably right.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, he probably is. He probably is.
Well, I want to thank Blake Wiliams for coming on and sharing all your thoughts and memories about your life and life with Bill Monroe and Lester Flatt and the bluegrass world. It's been fascinating, and I thank you again for coming on. It's great.
Well, Chris, it's been a pleasure, and your questions have been just wonderful and engaging, and I've really loved it. Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed our podcast, and thanks for listening. Visit our website, guitartownct.com, for concert and podcast schedules, or just to send us a message. We'd love to hear from you.